Good morning, Pee Dee. You're listening to Live and Local Mornings for Florence and the Pee Dee on Live 95.
Welcome back to Good Morning PD Live 95. 95. Forest Lake Greenhouse is our sponsor. Takes Mondays to make Fridays. Appreciate a good week of radio. I hope you appreciate the best we could do of radio. You folks have provided a lot of interaction, and we certainly appreciate that. Alec is doing a Facebook segment as we speak. You can watch this nonsense by turning on your Facebook page to @Live9553. Dr. Neal Thigpen is with us. This is not decaf coffee. I'm telling you, it is not decaf.
Is that what's going on
this morning? Well, I hit the place real early in the morning, and I tell the lady to give me decaf. And this week, I've checked. I've looked through the window, and she's giving me decaf. I couldn't find her this morning. She went somewhere else to get the coffee, and I'm afraid it's not decaf, and it's got me kind of
snorting there, dude.
Got me kind of amped up here this morning. Dr. Neal Thigpen once again is with us. I want to ask you a question. Now we're going to talk about the CPAC speech and President Trump. We need to get back to talking more about that. But we were talking about Franklin. And Franklin, kind of the concept, toyed around with the concept of daylight savings time. But Franklin was kind of a political tinkerer anyway, wasn't he? I mean, he was always going his own way and doing his own thing and coming up with pretty wild ideas.
Thinker.
He was.
You know, and he was way ahead of his time, and he wasn't afraid of new ideas and one thing or another. You know, he was kind of a card. Probably, you know, you were asking about how did Jefferson get along with Franklin, and, you know, I can't answer that except to say that both of them were kind of free thinkers and not afraid to go into dark places and discovery, you know.
And talk about things that most people were uncomfortable talking about.
Oh, yeah, you know, and like, you know, like I said, you know, Franklin was a big skirt chaser. You know, he was, only thing I remember about Franklin, well, is that he and his son didn't get along. They broke, and they had a bad situation inside the family.
Okay, when you look at the founders, you look at Washington, obviously the first American president. You look at Jefferson, the third American president. You look at Franklin, such an influential figure in the formation of our country. And I mean, his fingerprints are still all over, the inventor, Benjamin Franklin. Why doesn't John Adams get the credit that I think he deserves?
Well, I think one thing is that he had the misfortune to be vice president under George Washington twice and succeeded him. And, you know, it's a lot of times it's not a good place to be coming after somebody who was particularly so adored by his fellow countrymen. And Adams was never able to get that kind of adoration. And, you know.
And he chose Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson was his vice president.
He didn't choose him, but that's the way
him for him.
Before the 12th Amendment,
correct.
He came out. And, you know, Adams had done some things. He had defended British soldiers in the whole Boston Massacre episode, and that didn't make him very popular. Plus, he almost equal to Jefferson in many ways. He was kind of an egghead and not particularly an attractive personality, you know, but he was a very gifted and able man.
And he and Jefferson fell out, for lack of a better word, during was that the 1800 election?
They didn't get along all that well.
Well, they were on and off, but they were on the same committee.
They were both on the committee that Jefferson was the chairman that wrote the Declaration of Independence. And as young men, they had made common purpose on a lot of things. But I think probably that little 4-year stint in there when Adams was president and Jefferson was vice president, and then the big 1800 election when Jefferson ran a second time for president and, you know, wound up whipping Adams. You know, that was the dawn of party when parties first came along.
That was the Federalists and the Jeffersons and
Democratic,
the Jeffersonian
Republicans and one thing or another.
And Alexander Hamilton was influential in that Jefferson-Adams election, correct? He and Burr.
Yes. Well, see, the Electoral College hadn't been tested
Correct.
much. In that period before the 12th Amendment, I mean, you had two presidential elections, and it was Washington and Adams. You just walked away with it. Every elector had the right to vote for two people.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1800, it was Jefferson and Burr that was Virginia and New York.
Correct.
See? And on the same ticket, Democratic-Republican ticket. And the agreement had been that Jefferson would be the presidential candidate, and Burr was a vice presidential candidate and a running mate. Well, the thing was so untested that the Democratic Republicans won more states and got more votes in the Electoral College. But see, thing hadn't been tested and thought through, and so every Democratic elector in his two votes voted for Jefferson and Burr. And so they wound up tying. The two Democratic Republicans wound up tying for president in the Electoral College. Well, as luck would have it, of course, the U.S. House had to sort it out as to who would be president and who would be vice president. As luck would have it, the Federalists controlled more state delegations to the U.S. House of Representatives, each state casting one vote. So there were more states in there that had a Federalist, were Federalist dominated, and cast their one vote, and the thing was deadlocked between Jefferson and Burr. And, of course, the Federalists were having a little fun on their money watching these two Democratic Republicans scraping and fighting to see who would be president and who would be vice president. Well, Hamilton finally, the spiritual leader of the Federalist Party and one of its founders, he said, listen, we got to break this thing up. It's bad for the country that this thing drags on. And he said to all the Federalist members of Congress, vote for Jefferson. I don't agree with his principles, but Burr is a person who has no principles at all.
Correct.
And so they went in, and the Federalists broke the tie, and Jefferson became president and Burr vice president.
And to me, the interesting part of that, Doc, and I could talk about this forever, and Rev, you're interested in this as well. The interesting part of this is Hamilton cast the deciding vote, and then the ensuing debate was Hamiltonian form of government or a version of government and Jeffersonian that really shaped the first 50 years of our country.
It did. Now, of course, like I always like to say, we live in a Hamiltonian
no question
country with a strong centralized national government.
But Jefferson won the sprint. He just lost the marathon. In the short run, Jeffersonian was the predominant form of or version of government that we chose.
But, in a Hamiltonian age, occasionally you'll have somebody who will say, I believe in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I believe in the principles that Jefferson set forth, calling particularly for limited government. Barry Goldwater was almost a Jeffersonian.
But to that point, Jefferson was a Jeffersonian until he became president. And the Louisiana Purchase and some other things.
Well, he argued for a limited power for the American president and all until he got to be president. And then, you had the Louisiana Purchase. And, we were talking about the Tripoli pirates and the Barbary pirates and his use of military force, to quell that. He assumed and took unto himself many of the early powers that an American president had.
And then Hamilton and Burr end up, if you think politics is nasty today, they end up in a duel.
Well, they were rivals in New York State politics. Local, all politics is local, and they despised one another. And anyway, they got into all kinds of hurling stuff at one another, pronouncements, and I don't know who challenged who to a duel. But Hamilton, it was probably Burr that challenged him. But somebody will call in and tell whether that's, but they were both from New York State, and dueling was outlawed in New York State. And so they had to go across the Hudson River to Weehawken, New Jersey, where there was a famous dueling ground. And it's always been shrouded in uncertainty and whatever. They say that Hamilton might have fired his weapon into the ground, but not old Burr, and got him on the first pass.
Shot him and killed him.
Killed him.
When we talk about political discontent and the emotions and energy of American politics, it began when we formed the country. It really
had
did.
Some duels here in South Carolina, the Cash Shannon duel. And that thing took place in the late 1800s. I think it was up in Marlborough County or someplace like that.
Dueling. We're all worried about Fox News and CNN and what they say about one another. These cats were dueling. I just think one of the most interesting takeaways from that, because I'm so interested in that Jeffersonian Hamiltonian debate, is that Hamilton basically allowed for the Jeffersonian form of government to take hold and then became its main critic. And I've always felt that, Jefferson probably won the short run. He really did. We were governed.
And then Burr is later tried for treason.
Correct.
At Richmond, for supposedly trying to open up. He was hiring gunmen and boaters and all this kind of thing, trying to take over some portion of the western United States. And he was tried for treason. He got off. But John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court then, and an avid Federalist. And he rode on horseback to Richmond to preside over the trial, but they couldn't convict him.
See, I could do this the rest of the day. I could literally talk about this stuff. And when I'm critical of Hamilton and his embracing of a big government, a central planner, I still always go back to the fact that he looked at Jefferson and said, I disagree with his principles and values, but the guy he's opposed has no principles or values. And I think that's commendable. I really think that speaks to, the good and decency of Alexander Hamilton. And I'll tell you, Jefferson said of Hamilton, and I think it's the greatest compliment Hamilton ever got, that he was a worthy foe. And that was...
He was, at Yorktown, he was a right gifted soldier and brave soldier, he was another one that was a skirt chaser, but...
skirt chasing and drinking wine is kind of what they did back then.
But he was there. He was in the lines, and, when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, and matter of fact, the American troops borrowed the British musicians' their various instruments and whatever. And as the British marched out, they played, the Americans played, band played, The World Turned Upside Down.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Let's take a break. We'll be back after the break. We'll talk about Trump and CPAC. Trump was not there, and Trumpism and Jeffersonian and Hamilton, they may be one day considered equal in their effect and influence on American politics. Forest Lake Greenhouse is our sponsor. Good morning, PD Live 95.